A pigeon flew 40 kilometers through enemy fire while seriously wounded, carrying a message from a surrounded American battalion. The soldiers waiting for it had almost no other way to reach help. The bird should never have made it home, but it did. And that pigeon was only one of 5 animals who entered human wars and somehow became heroes. They did not understand borders, politics, or why humans had suddenly decided to fire artillery at each other. But they understood voices. They understood trust. And when the people beside them were in danger, they acted. Number 5. Simon, the ship's cat. Simon lived aboard HMS Amethyst, a British warship traveling along China's Yangtze River in 1949 during the Chinese Civil War. His official role was ship's cat. His practical role was killing rats and behaving as though the entire vessel belonged to him. Then, the ship came under artillery fire. HMS Amethyst was struck more than 50 times. The captain and several crew members were killed. Simon was hit by shrapnel and suffered burns across his face and back. He disappeared into the ship. 5 days later, Simon emerged badly wounded and was taken to the sickbay. The crew expected him to die. He survived. He recovered and returned to work. That mattered because the damaged ship remained trapped on the river for nearly 10 weeks. Food was limited. The weather was hot and humid, and rats began attacking the supplies the crew needed to survive. Simon hunted them despite his wounds. He even killed a particularly aggressive rat the sailors had nicknamed Mao Tse-tung, because sailors trapped aboard a damaged warship apparently still had time for political satire. Simon also visited injured men in the sickbay, curling up beside them while they recovered. The crew promoted him to able seaman, which meant the Royal Navy now officially included a cat who had received a promotion for rat removal and morale. HMS Amethyst eventually escaped by moving downriver at night. Simon survived the ordeal but died later that year after returning to Britain. He received the Dickin Medal for bravery and remains the only cat ever awarded it. A fair achievement for an animal whose usual response to human authority is to push things off a table. Number 4. Smoky, the tiny engineer. In 1944, an American soldier found a Yorkshire terrier hiding in a foxhole in New Guinea. She weighed around 4 pounds, which is less than some military instruction manuals. Corporal William Wynne bought her, named her Smoky, and carried her through the Pacific. She lived on army rations, survived air raids, and traveled with Wynne on missions. She also performed tricks for wounded troops, because even during a world war, apparently someone still had to provide entertainment. Her defining job came at an airfield on Luzon in the Philippines. Engineers needed to run communication wire beneath a runway through a pipe around 70 feet long and only 8 inches wide. A human could not fit. The alternative was to dig up the taxiway by hand, a job that could take 3 days and leave men and aircraft exposed to Japanese bombing. Wynne tied a string to Smoky's collar and called to her from the other end. The pipe was dark, cramped, and partly filled with dirt. At points, Smoky had only a few inches of space. She moved forward anyway, dragging the string behind her. Once she emerged, the soldiers used it to pull the communication cable through. A 4-pound dog completed in minutes what military engineers expected to take days. More importantly, the runway did not have to be torn apart while enemy aircraft were attacking the area. Afterwards, Smoky continued visiting wounded men and performing the huge collection of tricks Wynne had taught her. She survived the war and went home hidden inside an oxygen mask carrying case, because apparently the armed forces had learned absolutely nothing from the last time somebody smuggled a dog aboard military transport. Smoky had no rank, no official training, and no idea what a telephone cable was. She just knew Wynne was calling. Number 3. Sergeant Stubby. In 1917, soldiers training at Yale University found a short-tailed brindle puppy wandering around their camp. They called him Stubby, mostly because military naming committees had apparently not yet become involved. Stubby quickly attached himself to Private Robert Conroy and the men of the 102nd Infantry. He learned the bugle calls, joined their drills, and even developed his own version of a salute, raising a paw towards his face whenever the soldiers saluted. Then, The unit was sent to France. Dogs were not allowed aboard the troop ship, so Conroy smuggled Stubby onto the SS Minnesota and hid him below deck. The plan worked until an officer discovered him. According to the story later preserved by the Smithsonian, Stubby saluted the officer. The officer let him stay. It may be the only known case of someone escaping punishment because their illegal passenger had excellent manners. Stubby reached the trenches in February 1918. During his first months at the front, he survived poison gas and was wounded by grenade shrapnel. But the gas attack left him unusually sensitive to the smell. When another attack arrived while soldiers were sleeping, Stubby detected it first. He raced through the trench barking and biting at the men until they woke and put on their gas masks. He also learned to locate wounded soldiers in no man's land. He listened for cries, found men lying between the trenches, and either stayed with them until help arrived or led them back towards safety. Late in the war, Stubby even helped capture a German soldier. When the man tried to run, Stubby grabbed his legs and held him until American troops arrived. By the end of the war, he had served in 17 battles. He returned to the United States, met presidents, and became one of the best-known animals of the First World War. The stray puppy who had technically boarded the Army transport as contraband returned home as Sergeant Stubby. Number 2, Wojtek the Soldier Bear. In 1942, Polish soldiers traveling through Iran encountered a young Syrian brown bear whose mother had likely been killed. They adopted him and named him Wojtek. At first, he was a mascot. Then, he grew. Wojtek became more than 6 feet tall and lived alongside the men of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. He wrestled with them, traveled with them, and learned to copy their behavior. The soldiers treated him less like a pet and more like an unusually hairy member of the unit. A fully grown bear wandering through camp eventually became completely normal. Presumably, once you have survived Soviet imprisonment and crossed the Middle East during a world war, your standards for normal become fairly flexible. When the unit was sent to Italy, Wojtek needed official permission to accompany them. So the Polish army enlisted him as a private, gave him a service number, and added him to the company records. Because taking a bear onto a military transport was forbidden. Taking Private Wojtek was apparently fine. In 1944, the company supported Allied forces fighting at Monte Cassino. The battle required artillery crews to fire constantly, which meant enormous amounts of ammunition had to be moved from trucks to the guns. Wojtek watched the soldiers lifting boxes and began copying them. Standing upright, he carried heavy ammunition crates between supply points. According to accounts from the unit, he worked without dropping them, moving loads that would normally require several men. The bear who had begun as an orphaned cub was now helping keep a front-line artillery unit supplied. After the battle, the company adopted an image of Wojtek, carrying an artillery shell as its emblem. He was later promoted to corporal. When the war ended, Wojtek traveled with the Polish troops to Scotland. He eventually moved to Edinburgh Zoo, where former soldiers would visit him. He lived there until 1963. Wojtek might be the strangest animal ever officially enlisted into an army. But number 1 completed a mission after suffering injuries that should have made flight impossible. Number 1, Cher Ami. In October 1918, American soldiers known as the Lost Battalion were surrounded in the Argonne Forest. They had pushed too far ahead. German troops now surrounded their position, communication lines had failed, and American artillery was landing dangerously close to their own men. Human runners could not get through the German lines, so the battalion relied on carrier pigeons. One of them was Cher Ami. The exact details of Cher Ami's connection to the Lost Battalion became tangled with legend after the war. Records and later retellings do not agree on every part of the story, but the final flight itself was real. Cher Ami was shot through the breast. Now also blind in one eye and one leg was nearly severed, leaving the message tube hanging from the injured limb. Despite the wounds, Cher Ami returned to the air. The pigeon flew around 40 kilometers in approximately 25 minutes and delivered the document. 40 kilometers, badly wounded, carrying a message from soldiers who had almost no other way to communicate with the outside world. The pigeon saved almost 200 soldiers from German attacks, as well as accidental American-friendly fire. Cher Ami survived the immediate injuries and was taken back to the United States, although the pigeon never fully recovered and died in 1919. The body was preserved and given to the Smithsonian, where Cher Ami still represents the thousands of carrier pigeons sent through gunfire because telephone wires could be cut and human messengers could be stopped. Simon protected a trapped crew's food. Smoky carried a cable beneath an airfield. Stubby detected gas and found wounded soldiers. Wojtek moved ammunition during one of the hardest battles of the Italian campaign. Cher Ami kept flying after being shot, blinded, and severely injured. None of them understood the causes of the wars around them. They did not know the flags. They did not know where one country ended and another began. They only knew the people who fed them, protected them, and needed them. And when those people were in danger, they stayed. Sometimes loyalty understands enough.